right. So where I left off, kind of ready to start looking at writing a metaprogram. I want to pick a specific task of something I could generate, something I could imagine generating that could be helpful, and work from there. I think so I think an interesting starting case is the tile symbols. Let's take a look at what happens with these. And a part of what makes it a little weird to figure out how to do this metaprogramming. So the tile symbols are they are declared as tile protos. So we go to that definition. They're declared to look like something like this. I'm gonna just start dropping all of this here for reference, right? So our tile protos look like this when they get declared, but if we go and look at what's actually in declarations, the tile scripts actually just look like a symbol name, a string name, and this proto thing. And then the static hook doesn't have anything to do with anything after that, and the rest of this is what gets used during the simulation, right? So all of this gets initialized by the hook. Well, that's not true. This doesn't get initialized by the hook. This is special. But this and this get initialized by the declaration. And it feels like all of it is kind of weird and silly to me, the more I look at it. Okay? Like, I kind of want to get a little more serious about what information exists at what stage. So the point here is that if I'm going to be running a metaprogram, then I won't need to run all these initialization hooks, right? These static hooks are basically standing in for what would eventually be a metaprogram, right? So the pattern here is, okay, let's start by making a couple of tweaks to things and see if things keep holding up as I do that. The tile scripts currently set this name. I'm going to change that. We're going to say that the proto, it's going to look like this. This one's going to be an these are going to be basically the counter parameters or something like that, or basic, yeah, like counter behaviors or something like that. I'm not sure. Basically, special selection. Oh, wait, these two here, tile parameters, these two are different. These are filled by tile clauses, and these are more tile parameters. So maybe we should be doing, there are tile parameters, there we go. So that keeps them in both optimized order and in sorted order. It's a little bit sloppy. So this is what's getting defined by the hook right here, though. So the idea is, what if the macro didn't contain the display name anymore? What if instead well, I was gonna say, what if instead all you get is the hook, but the symbol name would still have to get built in at this point. So my thinking is, if all I gave was the, well, I guess this is two separate things. Okay, so if I wanted to, I could say going like, okay, name equals straight lit part, right? And so this would be equivalent to what we had before. It'd be like this now, right? So we could make that change if we wanted to. Maybe we do. It's going to be a little tedious. And I don't really want to do the whole thing, just to get to the point of saying that there's something a little funny about doing it this way. The next step might be to say we want a display name separate from a symbol name. And that whenever the symbol name is good enough, it'll just be the display name. And then we just say, when we do the macro, the tile symbol name is getting dropped in next to the static hook. Okay? What's the issue? Oh, right. Right, and then this idea of display name has kind of just become theoretical. I'm not going to bother with it right now. And so now the issue is just one of wiping out all the places where I put in that display name. I'm just dropping that feature to get started here. And I think another reason why I'm kind of thinking to do this is that ultimately the point of this isn't to make the text adventure and the string linking here having multiple different variations of the symbol name for text mode versus like string literal mode versus not. It doesn't feel that meaningfully useful anymore. So I'm going to just say that when I'm making one of these literal scripts, there's no longer going to be a display name used for linking. If I ever want a display name, that'll be like how I use the sprites in the graphic system. I attach sprites to the characters. Similarly, I could attach display names to tiles if I wanted each one to have like a printable string name, which may be the case. Or I could go and put them into the protos. There's all kinds of ways I could decide to mark up these. I could make it intrinsic to the tile, or it could be like this, like additional markup that exists outside of the original symbol set. But the point of it either way is that it wouldn't be the one I would use for linking to it anymore, because that just makes things more confusing when there are like two different names for everything, and you're trying to make it so you can link between them more tightly, like code identifiers. We'll just use the identifier safe version of the name everywhere. until we are specifically trying to improve and iterate on a display issue. That should do it. And just to be sure everything's still working, we'll travel to town 2, protect on captain, crash. Okay, so it's not during a nib, but something goes wrong here. See, we must have constructed one of my parties, like NPC parties, must be wrong. Let's see. Must be proto character. Here we go. Here are a few of them. Let's just look at all the cases of proto character. Make sure I removed spaces from all of the uses of tile syntax. There's a mistake. 1, 2. Still same thing, huh? Okay. Let's see about somewhere in here. I don't know if any of these is the one I'm looking for. Counter. So it does get this far. Where did it struck the party? Here it did. Travel to town 2, C1 on character A. Okay, this encounter proto looks like garbage. Where did that come from? I mean, that's coming from... Travel... Frame init. The init frame on this thing sets up the encounter deck. We need to look here. Travel to town 2. What do you find? They have protos. Total count 0. Deck. The deck looks fine. Oh, maybe it's the... Yeah. Probably going to end up removing display names from all of the protos as well. But since I went and aggressively removed spaces everywhere, let me just carry that logic through by applying it to the display names now so that it should work, and then when we eliminate the display names entirely, it'll be the same logic. All the things will link to each other the same way. Travel to town 2, C1 on A. Still crashing, okay. Travel to town 2. What's our encounter deck like? Oh, right. And there's also more over here in shrooms. Travel to town 2. That continue. C1 on A. Real party. Yes, this looks good. This looks real. And let's clear out those breakpoints now. Should just be splatted into a combat. A1, A2, B2, C1, D2. Looking good. A2, B2, C1, D2. Good. A1, A2, B2, C1, D2. We'll camp here. No camp moves. Rest. Some kind of bug here. They shouldn't be getting to use wake up move. Sleep, and happening. So to do investigate that as a game bug. But there we go. Okay, so Okay. So now when I look at what's a tile proto, it looks like this. This much gets initialized by the declaration, and the rest is actually filled out elsewhere. Right? It's actually different. So when it's all said and done, what should be possible is to make a split where this is the pre version and all of this is the post version. And so I guess that's where we'll start. Let's try to print out everything that it would take to as C code that it would take to represent this information. First, we need to run the static context. So get RPG. I don't exactly know how I want to think about this. Static context, RPG, static context. That gets us the processed version as it is represented in the static context currently. Yeah, let's just print out what the tile protos would look like. First things first. For each tile symbol, yeah, let's just preemptively make this a stream thing. All right, let me change some things here in the project. When we run Metaprogramming, don't put it into. Also, when we run all, don't put it in there in the future. Just better that way. So, there, like that's how it would work. There's a bunch of stuff about that's cool. Right now, I don't have any way. When I see a tile ID, I don't have any way to ask, hey, what's the name? Like, what tile does this ID go to? Except to pull up in the debugger the array of all the tile symbols, right? I can look through the tile symbols and figure it out that way. This just puts all the tiles straight into an enum so I can visually inspect it, which is a different kind of use case. That's a good first step. Now, the next thing is we can do this, and then what I'm going to want to do is go shoot. Here we can start to do stuff like manually control what the null looks like now. We didn't used to be able to do this, so we've always got off by ones between the small consecutive IDs and the array itself. Minus ones and plus ones because they're not both zero based. Now we can insert that null record all on our own and get exactly what we would always want, except, you know, maybe we want to still specify out what the null record should contain in some way. But then the rest of this can just be let's see, whatever it takes to fill out the whole proto. Right, so there's, well, 0 for the static hook. I go like this. Comes next after the static hook is display name or symbol name. Okay, so I'm immediately getting a sense for what the downside is here, right? The downside for specifically the downside for doing a source text metaprogramming. And the downside is that memcop doesn't work. That's the downside, right? All right, question chat. What are we working on today? I'll recap where we're at. So, been working on the RPG simulator for a while, and I've got all these tiles that I define with the C scripting stuff. I've got all of the the characters and the machine rules, the state machine rules, and now there are also things like the locations, so the graph that forms the map that you can explore during one of the during a run of the game. They're all defined in C scripts, and a lot of them undergo a certain amount of pre-processing. Now that code has all been working just fine. It's actually quite easy to write and maintain, but it feels a little bit unfortunate the amount of stuff that has to be redone on init, and I wanted to explore the possibility of baking it further. So basically being able to replace runtime static initialization with pre-compiled data and symbols that we can link to. So right now we're doing source text style metaprogramming just to test out what this is like, if it in fact is nice. And the first thing I was just commenting on that I'm not liking is the way that this is going to put so much weight on, like, for instance, if I start refactoring tile proto, each refactor of tile proto is going to entail a lot more work than it used to. It used to be that this was actually all self-maintaining in the way you would want, and now that the metaprogram is trying to splat out text that represents one of these, we've actually incurred significant maintenance overhead to the point that I'm about ready to bail on this approach just talking about it. I mean, the IDs part was super easy and nice, and so maybe the idea here is to keep that and dump the rest. This does solve a problem I was referring to earlier, which is now all these IDs can be inlined as aggressively as possible because they're known to the compiler rather than only being known to the linker. I mean, I'll finish filling this in here, but I don't think we're going to go this way. Speed. Yeah, and this last one's not so easy to fill either. How are we going to fill this function pointer? This is one of those advantages, but what goes there now? I mean, just because we have the function pointer doesn't mean we know how to print code that links to the function pointer. C doesn't come with something where I can go move condition get symbol name, right? That's not an option. So I don't know. I don't know. This direction feels like a bust. I feel like we need something a little closer to a mem copy. Right? That's all we're trying to do. We're saying we already have the code that prepares the data. We just want to save it. And we can't. And trying to do it through the source text isn't making it easier. It's making it quite a bit harder. Yeah, I just don't believe that this is the way. Okay, so that rules that out. I'm seeing now pretty clearly that there is actually a significant difference. This, at the very least, not suitable for data table. This incurs like a struct printing problem. It also incurs like a function pointer printing problem or something like that. Doesn't work. Okay. Um, yeah, I mean that just kind of more or less doesn't work out super. I don't know what to say about it beyond that. I mean, can't even. The only way you could solve this last piece is to somehow get a name from function pointer in the program that's currently running. You would basically need to say you're building the metaprogram in debug mode. That's also assuming that you know the function names in the final are going to match. Real uncertain business. um, yeah, this is. I think that's just a no go. I'll keep this much. All right, so there might be some utility in using this to generate the IDs, but it's a lot to take on just to solve a problem, just to minorly improve the ID assignment logic. Yeah, this just leads to a lot of other problems too. Like, okay, the if we look at these tile scripts, I'm making flags out of other symbol sets, right? So for instance, I have a move kind symbol set. And the reason I have that is so that things can be more modular, like the shrooms module here can introduce, well, it's not a move kind, but it's a hit kind. I think the rest module maybe, who introduces the, like, dream? Yeah, the dream move kind. Hey, Paging Turner. Welcome. I was checking out your symbol set exploration earlier. Pretty cool. Okay. That's thought number one. That didn't pan out. Let's go do let's do one quick detour here. While I was messing with the protos for the tiles, we kind of decided that we want that we want to reduce the we want to remove that whole display name thing I used to be doing. So Photo. What am I missing? Context age. Right, these ones. I want to just remove display names from the system, and we'll go with symbol names instead. That's going to at least improve our metaprogrammability if we always have a symbol name on things. So then set up the name map for the protos. Interesting. Okay. Right, so each of these is just going to be wrong. We're going to want to go boom, boom. Excellent. Okay, so let's look at the build all though, and run main, and that's good. I'm really curious, like what you're finding. You know, so far I've been the only person really digging into it that I know of, so it's definitely encouraging to know that someone else is getting into it. Um, and I see that you're working on like corners of it that I haven't touched, and I don't even know what, if anything, they actually mean. But I'm just curious, like, if you've got further thoughts than what you've shared so far. I'm all super down to hear more about it. Okay, so I think the next step here is the possibility of, you know, it didn't work out to um, link functions into tile protos through a metaprogram, but it might be different to compose these protos. And the reason that I think it might be different is that all you really need here are a bunch of references to the tile IDs. Now, as I say that, I realize that I'm still going to run into the problem that I don't really want to do it through the source text. And the reason, again, is that the source text has certain limitations. If this becomes a literal, right, if I were to expand this macro into something that looks like, say, proto toxic shroom equals and say this is just going to become a tile proto, so it's going to have like RPG proto symbol. It's got like, it's got the basics, so it's going to have toxic shroom symbol name. It's going to have proto-kind character automatically. And then it's going to have So if it generates this code, we run into a little problem, right? So you could imagine this is the RPG proto, right? Somehow, and this is the, what did I call these? That's awesome. That's cool that you got the profiler version up and running. I haven't explored that yet, but that's encouraging to hear. It's a surprisingly flexible system. I feel like over and over again. So anyway, the weird thing here is even if I do all this right, I can write a metaprogram that'll process this into basically this is this, which then shows up here, and this goes here, right? Um, so the metaprogram would build this with that script included, and then the final one would. Oh man, it just feels like this is gonna be so much harder with C metaprogramming. I feel like that it's just a fool's errand to do any of this with text-based metaprogramming. Now that I'm staring at it more and more, it's so far out from what's really going on there. The other issue here is the tiles. All right, we're going to build this twice, and then what the tiles can't even be referenced like this. They still have to be raw because they're not. They're in a global declaration, and so then you still have to process this into another level, right? Like just none of this quite feels right. So I think I'm tending away from the idea that text-based metaprogramming actually makes this any easier. I think the only thing it does is to get the constants up sooner, but it's actually much harder to fiddling with. Um, yeah. Okay, so not to say there'd never be a version of C scripting that's useful for C-based metaprogramming, but I'm not so convinced that I want to go down this route for using symbol set data in the way that I do in the RPG simulator. That doesn't seem realistic. So I think that this is more the system that I want. And the reason that I think that this might be more of a realistic way of doing it is that it allows me to, right, if I start dealing with object files as the inputs and outputs, I might be able to build the metaprogram in such a way that the point is to replace the data that gets created by the compiler is the data for the metaprogram, and not the data for the final program, right? There'd be kind of like two different access points to the symbol set. You access them directly the way I've been doing, you get the data as it was built. But somehow there's another way to say I want to access this thing, and when you do that, you get the final baked version, right? Let me draw the picture I have in mind. I want a magical world where I write some, let's call it a C script, right? I write a C script, which is a part of a symbol set. That gets compiled. And so we have basically a little data record with our data record. With a relocation. That wants to point to some procedure body here. And that's all living inside of an object file is right. To put this another way, this is a pointer to a C symbol. Just so we're clear, a C symbol has each C symbol has a name. Well, let's just say is. C symbol basically is a name. That's the thing we link it with. And section num offset. Right, so a location via section number and offset. Now, I think what I'm contemplating is instead of linking this, so instead of running this through the linker to get an executable and then running that, doing something else, right? The idea is don't do this, because this throws away symbols and relocations. We want those to stay intact. That's my new hypothesis. So the metaprogram would actually prefer to be the kind of thing that takes in an object file and generates an object file. Not necessarily an object file editor. It's not necessarily editing this one in place, but it's processing this one into something with different information layout, differently packed data. Right? This is the declarative loose thing. This runs the static initialization, all the stuff that can be derived from the finite set of symbols and their interconnections statically. And this is the baked table, the thing that can drive the compute on top of the symbol set at top speed. I think that this is the right direction. We'd have to make sure that we can reliably get to all this information, which means both having a parser that always does this and knowing that the compiler is going to behave as predictably as we expect. Which isn't a guarantee, but it's worth looking into. If that works out, then what we could then do is say, okay, this relocation is correct. We want to keep that around. Everything outside of the symbol data, right? This is the piece of that makes the C script, right? This is a part of a larger object file. What we could be doing here is saying this object file is getting thrown out, the data sections it has are getting thrown out and replaced with a different one. The only thing that's left that's confusing about that is what's the type information supposed to be, right? If I declare well, yeah, see, the metaprogram doesn't even have to be built with this as an input. That's the thing. The metaprogram is actually going to go and scan it, and so it's going to be using the prototype. It's going to be using the pretypes, right? The types that are built into this version. And if it wants to change those types, it'll do so as it bakes them out to this version. The question then is, how did the how does all the stuff that the main program wants to link to get linked in properly, right? And I guess what it's assuming is that I mean, I think I see it. It's just going to take a couple steps to get there. I think we need to go and dig into object files. We need to be able to deconstruct one of the object files that we're generating right now, and then we need to get good at reconstituting that information into a new object file. I also might need to figure out how I'm going to split things out into two separate object files or something, or like I might need to be able to preserve most of what's in the original object file and just rewrite some of the data tables or something. You know what I mean? So just to complete some of the picture that I have here, say I've got a symbol set. I've got a symbol. What I want is that symbol in two different contexts. There's going to be a metaprogram and a main program. And I want that there's a symbol which maps to an ID, either has an ID, right? And then has some metadata so that is to say this ID maps to let's say so here the ID maps to some kind of symbol meta type. And here the ID maps to some kind of symbol, I don't know, main type. Bake type. Maybe just this is the symbol type. My concern here is, I guess, that the code for accessing things from the metaprogram might end up looking quite a bit different from the code for accessing things from the main program, right? And if they look different, they don't transfer between the one to the other very nicely. So like what I've been doing up until now is I've been making a system where my ID maps to some kind of symbol type data, right? So there's a specific type for each symbol. That's the symbol's type, and each ID maps to one of those. And what I'm essentially doing is saying, okay, now there's a meta program, and right now that ID maps to the same type that I've been doing all along. But when I'm done, I want them to diverge. There's the declarative type, which is this one. And then there's the computation type, or there's the runtime type, which is this one. And so there's going to be the metaprogram's job is basically to include the mapping from symbol meta types to final symbol type data. Right, and so if we know how that mapping is supposed to be implemented, then we know what the metaprogram is supposed to do. I mean, it makes sense in principle, but it's so out there that I'm not sure how to step towards it in one. Like, I don't know how to get there yet. This is a little bit mind expanding today. So I don't know. I think the only thing I can think of to do is we got to start getting better at object file parsing and reading and generating again. We got to dig into that stuff. That might be where I call it today, and we'll just start off tomorrow with something like trying to parse one of the symbol sets by reading its object file instead of by compiling it into the main program. Right now, the symbol data just gets compiled into the main program. That's how it's so easy to access. That's been very convenient. But if I want to do a baking process, if I want to be able to step from that way of doing things and gracefully get to a way where I can do some pre-processing, I can do some baking on it that runs before the main program is finished being assembled, I think we're gonna have to take some baby steps towards getting a handle on our object file powers and come back to this once we have a little more of a realistic idea about what we can and can't do there. But I'm convinced this is going to work out better. If this is real and possible, I'm convinced that's going to work out better than the source code thing because of all these issues that come up with source code metaprogramming, where you need to like you run all your computation on a version of the data that is maximally useful, but that's missing so much of the data that you would need to print it out as correctly as possible, including the most frustrating of all, not being able to print a function pointer from the metaprogram into the output data tables, but also like needing, you can't, there's no, it's basically the struct serialization problem. You got to print out all the members of the struct. When we print out declarations, we can't link their IDs properly until after some before main functions have run, which always run after data declarations themselves are evaluated. So we would want some way to actually stick in the IDs and know that they're the correct order. There's just so many things here. And of course, if we do the text version, right now there's no way to avoid the fact that we have to make the macros mean two different things everywhere. I think with a method like this, we would only ever have one type of definition macro. And the trick would be, let's see here. Oh, I got a good question. USD approved. I'll circle back and answer your question in a sec. Okay, cool. You got it. Yeah, the main thing is it can work and it has worked. It's very flexible. It's just that it precludes a certain amount of pre-processing that can be done ahead of time, right? So it's basically forcing certain things that are statically known pieces of information that, in theory, we could say, hey, in a game engine, it would be appropriate to take all this information and bake it into some kind of tighter data structure ahead of time, but we can't. We have to do it at a init time. And so the question is, how can we take that piece of init code and start shifting it into the build process instead of putting it at the init time of the program, without majorly complicating the maintenance, right? If this could be done, but it takes super heavy duty, new tooling and stuff, then it's not a success. But I suspect there's got to be a way to do it with object file parsing that won't overcomplicate the maintenance in the long run. Okay, so where was I going to go track this down? I was at... Right, so let's look at context H here. Say, for instance, I want to look at the tile proto example. The tile proto, not defined here because it's one of the ones that gets defined over here still. Might just be unnecessary slop from the RPG Simulator's course of evolution. But for now, the tile proto lives right here. And really all we ever define into it with the macro is the static hook and the symbol name. And the static hook is responsible for setting up a bunch of this. And then the tile clauses are responsible for setting up a few of them as well. And so you have to do a certain amount of processing. Now the processing is happening right here. Right? Here and here, those are getting processed. But like once this is done, there's not a whole lot of need for all of these raw IDs and the event type of the tile clauses to stick around, for instance. This could all be boiled down into a set of smaller 32-bit IDs if we could save the pre-processed version, right? We come here and the first thing we do is we convert each of our IDs to a smaller ID. We run these event subtypes and everything. This doesn't even need to survive the final processing of all this. That's actually just a part of making sure we run the right conversion on the raw ID to the final ID. And then we stick it into um, a map that maps these ID sequences to specific clauses, all the clause actually ends up being is a payload for a specific hook, and then possibly has some implications for the tile protos. But if these could be applied ahead of time, and if we end up with a way to serialize out our hash tables, then then all of this can be ahead of time baking. But that would mean in the final version there'd be no tile clause decals at all, right? And so the question is, what happens? What happens there? I mean, these survive in the serialized hash table. These survive in the serialized hash table and in the tile protos. This can also survive here in the tile proto. All of the places where we set, right, so that needs to all get replaced with things that would look like, you know, obj symbol relocation block clause hook 8 bytes pointing to, and then instead of having a decal hook here, we'd have a symbol to be like decal hook symbol, right? All of this is sort of more or less what I expect it would end up looking like. So like here, it's defining the clause symbols, and then it's also making these function signatures. If that's all in happening in one object file, it's fine because they're still in separate sections. What I think we should be able to do is to delete these original meta data sections and replace them with a single regular old data section with all the baked data in one place, right? This would eliminate all kinds of things. This would mean that all the cases where we weren't actually using the symbol data, the metadata at all, it's just for generating these small unique IDs, those go away because we're eliminating all the proto stuff, right? All the prototype metadata is being dropped, so these will be gone. All of the things where we're doing baking will be baked into the object file. Then the question becomes, how does it know, right? So the defines will still define the types the way they always have, because these are the prototypes or the meta types or whatever. These are the pre-types. And so they'll get defined and placed into these data sections so that they are marked for removal later, right? That's basically how we're thinking about this. The data sections that are special ultimately can't stay because each one entails 4 kilobytes of alignment anyway. So we have 4K pages all over the place here. The final goal is not to have that, so those are getting eliminated anyways in an advanced version of this. What if the advanced version of this includes room for a plan where you also can transform the data from the declarative format to the baked format? Then something like this tile script here, instead of having just a tile proto, we'd have tile meta, which would just be the symbol name and the static hook. And then we'd have tile proto, which would be all of this. The static hook would be replaced with like a meta hook or something, right? It's a means meta hook. And then when the meta hook runs, it fills this essentially, as well as when we process tile clauses, it helps to fill this. And so then there's a second type here. There'd be like meta type and final type or something like that. So pre-type, post-type. I'm not sure. But anything that has a post type would then mean when we access it, so we're calling it metadata right now, which is confusing. So this could be meta type, and this could be prototype. I don't know, but I'm not sure. But whatever the case is, it would mean that Here, the thing that does declare and therefore the thing that does define is generating prototype, right? When we reference it with this, all we're ever referencing is an ID. And that ID is figured out that ID is figured out right here. So this is a part where if there was a final version of this, maybe we would want to figure out how the object files could just encode this so that these names don't have to involve a little arithmetic resolution. And right now it's like it's got to do a bounds check and then some arithmetic, and then we can get from the name to the ID. Even though it's all known statically by the end of link time, it's not known prior to that, so the compiler can't optimize away any of this arithmetic. So that might be the level where the system at its best actually involves text generation, but maybe, just maybe, we could get halfway there by eliminating all the arithmetic. The text generation would probably be the best version, because then even constant inlining stuff could happen better. But I'd be happy with just getting it down to it's a single constant, no arithmetic or conditionals, just a symbol with a name that you can link against that gives you the right thing in a single automatically. So I think, yeah, this is the sort of advanced version of the object file manipulation stuff that I wanted to do for symbol sets. Seems intimately intermixed with the best approach to metaprogramming at this point. Like, it seems like I'm gonna want a picture where both happen together. The more I'm staring at it, because then to finish the idea, the final thought here is like once raw is eliminated and once this is just an ID, then when you're in the metaprogram, this is an ID index off of this thing, which you're still going to access the old-fashioned way, where you examine your own image, or where you are examining an input object file. Either way is not too important which way it is. I guess, no, it's got to be an object file now. It has to be an object file so that we don't lose symbol relocation data, right? We don't want to resolve everything down to function pointers that lose that extra piece. Now, I guess the alternative, the fallback here is if object file processing doesn't turn out to be the solution, if it's way better to write the code without having to read the data structure out of an object file first in the metaprogram. Then the other thing we could do is say you have to build these in debug mode, and that this is going to read its own debug information in order to create a map back to the function symbols, right? If you have the debug info, then you have a map from the function pointer to the symbol name again. And so that's another way you could do it. I don't know, though. Seems like a farther... that seems... Debug parsing is even more out there than everything else we're talking about. Even though that's probably ultimately something we want. We want to be able to examine the structure of the program. I think it's easier to imagine just looking at the object file. So what would have to happen is when you're declaring it, and defining it, you're defining these types. But whenever you do this, the metadata thing, you'd actually be querying it off of this type, right? You'd be getting things back of this type. And so you wouldn't do this in the metaprogram. You would do this during the main program to access the data generated by the metaprogram, which could be a different type if it's going to be that way, right? And even if it's not going to be modified, then we're going to want to eliminate the data section and bake it into the data thing. So yeah, I think that basically what this comes down to is the metaprogramming I want is probably an extension of the basic object file fix-up that I've already envisioned. Right, the object file fix-up is, hey, we don't like this arithmetic on the IDs. We don't like having these extra data sections. What if we just reach in there and reconfigure things a little bit so that raw IDs aren't necessary and everything is always already a small consecutive ID the moment you link it together, and we eliminate these extra data sections so that everything's actually just sitting back in the main.data section like a normal piece of data. And the only reason it was ever separated was so that we could mark it for special processing, right? This is essentially a tag at this point. We're placing something in a data section is like saying, I give it this specific special data tag, and then the metaprogram processes all the tagged data and turns it back into regular data, but linking it up in a special way, right? And then once that's up and running, the metaprogramming is just to take that basic thing and customize it, right? To add in custom transforms along the way. USDA approved. I don't have anything written up on this yet. It's all very early, the metaprogramming part. If you'd like to learn more about the symbol set stuff, I have this repository called C Scripting. It is private. You have to be a supporter. You have to be over here and become I think you have to become a member. Yeah, in order to get access to the closed Mr. Forth Git stuff, you need to get a membership at the Mr. Forth Lab, and then you could see the sort of partially done C scripting stuff. And you can also go onto my YouTube. If you go to this video, see if it'll actually load. Can we see the title? Is YouTube gonna load? Kind of feels like it's frozen up for some reason. Still on OBS. Yeah, no, it's just that browser window isn't working. I don't see any dropped frames, so I don't know why this YouTube isn't. There we go. Yeah, you're gonna look for this video here, and I go through everything that I had on day one of the C scripting repository, and basically what I've been doing today is my first very big, I've done a few small things, but this is my first very big new experiment on top of what we already have. Also, if you head over to the Discord server, Paging Turner, who's hanging out in chat, has also been working on some symbol set experiments, and so you might be able to get a little bit more information based on what they've had to share about it. But it's not all entirely ready, right? Yeah, so I've got my YouTube channels, just to explain. There's one where I post the edited content, and there's one where I post stream archives, and then there's a very small one that not very many people follow where I post me just rambling, not edited, but it wasn't live stream stuff. That's usually what I do at my lowest effort possible, when I'm mostly for my own benefit, organizing, like sort of logging thoughts to myself. There's nothing about the C scripting on that channel, but the YouTube archive has, the archive of the streams on YouTube has my best introduction to C scripting so far. Once it's a more refined system, I intend to publish a version of my code base with the symbol sets built in as a header you can just start using, and also an example of a standalone symbol set system. We're just not there yet. I want to keep vetting it. For instance, we just, over the last weekend, Paging Turner helped to figure out what we had to do to tweak it to make it run on Mac. So it's early days. I'm not trying to push out half-baked ideas too quick, you know? With that said, I think, like I said, that the next big step is going to be to go into object files like fully for the next couple weeks. We need to get good at, we've got the OBJ from raw causing some issues too, like right here I have this issue. It's not really the OBJ from raw itself, that's working just fine. but the output type is my build system doesn't really know how to deal with OBJ versus file extensions, and so I have to switch it depending on which compiler I have, just because that's the way my switch works right now, and it's just not right anymore. So we got a lot of stuff to do. I think it's time to go and think about how we're going to stitch together a more flexible build system, how we're going to make OBJ from raw better, and then from there make a leap to trying to do some actual object file post processing, and see if we can get symbol sets up, Mark II up and running. So I think for a final thought here, let me switch over to my big tech tree. I thought I saved this. Does it not? Does it not have a name? File, save as. What is this? This is my Metaprogramming C scripting canvas. Now let's go back to the lab tech tree. Yeah, this is where we're going for the rest of the next couple weeks, I think. So to summarize, what I spent the last few weeks on was I iterated on game rules a lot, and I thought a little bit more about most deeply I thought about the tile board optimization stuff, and in thinking about that, like the inlining problem, the metaprogramming problem, we ended up at this point where I'm now thinking the right thing to work on is the metaprogramming, but I don't think the text-based metaprogramming approach is working. So we're looking more at OBJ post-processing as the direction I want to go in, which means we're now trying to get to C scripting Mark II, which means we need to go look over here, C scripting Mark II. Is there anything else I thought of getting to first? I think this is it. Yeah, so we're gonna just try to build up some object debug editing. We don't need debug editing yet for this variant because we're not going to be moving any global variables around. We're going to be moving around some data, but I don't think that the debugger is ever going to be used to access anything that we relocate yet. So we could get away with it without having to master debug files, actually. Leave a little note. Restricted object I guess that is object file generating. So yeah, the point is we want to just spend more time investing. Level up tech we've got right. I guess though, well, why did I think C scripting Mark II would require debug editing? I'm not sure if I still believe that. Let me think. Yeah, I'm gonna say no. This is a mistake. what we actually have going on here is that to get to C scripting Mark II, I think we can skip debug editing. That's a little bit overkill. Okay. USD approved. I'm glad to hear you say that. I've been trying real hard to, show that my process isn't just nonsense. Like we're trying to build cool new stuff here, and I think that this is a nice building block towards more flexible paradigm of programming. Well, that's a long road ahead, right? Before we are going to get to visual programming, I'm trying to just get a total handle on sort of flexible compositional programming, and so it's cool if other people are starting to see some value in it. I do think the C scripting stuff has really taken off as something I'm excited about, that I think could uh, be useful in a lot of places. So if you want to check it out and you get your eyes on it and you get some new ideas of how you'd like to see it used, very helpful. And of course, I'm always in need of more support. The lab's not got nearly enough financial support. I'd love to keep this going forever. Right now, we're just coasting. So more financial support will be hugely appreciated from you or anyone else that's watching and thinking that this stuff is worthwhile. With that, I think I'm going to wrap up for today. And like I said, tomorrow we'll come back in and maybe we'll start diving into things like the OBJ from raw, and maybe see if we can't parse one of the symbol sets out of an object file. So come back tomorrow and we will look at that. All right. And I'll see you all around the internet. Until bye bye.